Kanse, Celina Loyer Kasikasun. Hi, my name is Celina Loyer, and I'm here to talk about Métis sashes and finger weaving. So I have here two examples of a sash. This one is the one that I think most people would most easily recognize as a Métis sash. This is the kind of sash that you would see someone who self-identifies as Métis wearing. This is I guess you would call it a modern sash. It's created on a machine loom. They create them in big strips. They cut the edges, and then they create the fringes on the bottom. This is a symbol that you may have also seen French Canadian people wear, and it's something that we share in common with the fur trade history that we have with the French Canadian people. You'll notice that when you see a Métis person wearing it, the men will wear it tied around their waist, and women will wear it over their shoulder and tied on the side like this. And they wear it across their heart to show their pride in being Métis. My grandmother actually told us that when she would go to the Lac St. Anne pilgrimage, there was a man who wore a sash that had a certain color of indigo in it. And because of that, she knew which family he belonged to. And so that's an old teaching about families having different patterns and colors of their own. So traditionally, a sash like this that was woven by hand, like 300 or 400 years ago, the yarn was actually something that they got from the European people. So this is a mixture of those two different cultures, just like Métis people are. So this is a very traditional style of weaving. I learned how to do this weaving when I was a teenager, along with my mom, from a man named Jacques Berry, who had learned from someone in Quebec years and years and years ago. Traditionally, the First Nations people did weaving of this type. They had different patterns for each different area, and they used whatever textiles they had at hand. So they would use bark, or they would use different kinds of grasses or roots, and they would dye them using berries and leaves and those kinds of things, so that they would get different colors on the different strands that they were making. This particular pattern, the Assumption pattern, is actually an Iroquois pattern. And they just simply adapted using the textiles that were starting to be brought from Europe into using it in the same sort of a form that they had traditionally used for their own weaving. Sometimes it's referred to as backstrap weaving because it's weaving that's done without a loom. It's done just with your hands. This sash is a more traditional fur trade sash. It's done in the traditional finger woven manner. I made this sash for my husband. It's also known as a ceinture flèchée. It's got the arrowheads down the center, and it's got the lightning pattern on the side. This particular pattern is known as an Assumption sash because the original pattern was created in a place called Assumption, Quebec. So this particular sash is the kind of sash that would have been used during the fur trade. These sashes were actually made by the women and worn by the men, and they used them as their tool belt. So as the voyageurs were going up and down the rivers in their canoes coming from Montreal out to Edmonton, they would have worn this tied around their waist. This sash is kind of small compared to a traditional one. A traditional one would be about 30 centimeters and be at least 2 meters long. They were very long. They would wear them wrapped around and around their waist. It would help to support their back while they were carrying those heavy loads while they were portaging. They would help to support their back while they were canoeing down the river. Because they were so big, they could actually fold them in half, wear them tightly wound around their waist, and it would actually create a little pocket so that you could put things in there and you could keep them to keep them safe while you were going up and down the river. They use them for all kinds of things. So they're very, very strong. The way that the weaving is done, the line of force is down the center, so that even if you break one or two threads, it still is a very, very strong tool. They would use it, they would have maybe their knife tied off one side and their hatchet tied off the other. They would use it to pull in their canoe. They'd use it to tie up their horse. They would use the end of it for sewing up a little piece of their leg, of their pant if they got a rip in it. It's kind of interesting because they would also use them for even carrying wood in them. There's a story in one of the fort journals of a man who actually broke his arm while he was out on the trail and used his sash as a sling until he could get back to the fort and get the arm set again. And they were so well used that one of my ancestors, Louis Caraconte, who actually came out with the fur trade from Montreal, would go back and forth from Edmonton to Montreal, and every year he would get a new sash because he would wear the one out that he had. So I have several different patterns here. So this is, as I was talking about the lightning pattern, you can see here, this is a lightning pattern that has just the lightning on it. So you can see how many different ways the lightning goes on there. Originally, this kind of a sash is what this pattern was based off of. You can see that there's a big difference in the texture of the materials that are used as well as how it's woven. I also have here a flame pattern, which would be another similar type of a sash that has the arrowhead, but here you can see the lozenge sort of shape, these diamond shapes that are actually represent the flame coming up the side. Some other patterns that people were aware of would be what's known as the chevron pattern. So if you look carefully at this, you can see the V or the chevron in there. And another one that's just fun is the W or the double chevron pattern that I have here. So traditional finger weaving or ceinture flechée is done simply by using your hands and the yarn that you're using. It's set up with two sticks at the top. So each thread goes from being a warp thread to a weft thread and then back to a warp thread again. If you're a weaver, you'll know what I'm talking about. So you actually take the center thread and you insert it between the other threads. And then this is how you begin the weaving. You simply go along. As you're going along, you count the pattern inside your head. When you're looking very closely at it, you'll see that at a certain point as I'm going along, I'm going to count to 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. And on the 9th thread, I'm going to switch. And this is what creates the pattern or the lightning in this particular sash. So every time I'm doing this, as I'm moving through each color, I'm going to switch on the 9th thread, and that's what creates the lightning pattern here. So you can see that I switched the blue for the yellow there. Now I'm going to switch this yellow for the green here. You can see that there are two alternating colors of green. This particular type of pattern is called a stipple. And here's where I'll switch it here. Then we'll traverse through the orange and we'll get to the black at the end. I use the black as a border on this particular sash because I like the way that it outlines the whole pattern that we're making. So that now that I'm traveling this to the end of the orange, at the end of the orange I'll switch it so that it creates the pattern of the border right here. And then I'll go to the end. And when I get to the end of doing this particular section of black, you'll see here that that is half of one row. That's half of this part here. So for a sash of this width and this many threads, it would take me probably an hour to do one repetition of it. So that's about this much of the weaving right there. This particular sash that I'm making is about the width that a traditional sash would have been. They were usually about 30 centimeters wide. And so this particular sash is one that is being made in that particular style. It's also probably, by the time I get done it will be this length, probably almost 2 meters long. So it will very much be representative of that kind of a sash. These kind of sashes traditionally were used as the tool belts for the voyageurs. But nowadays, people usually wear them and use them just to show that pride in their history and to recognize that connection to the fur trade that helped to shape who the Métis people are.